Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review and a little bit of a rant on the 2019 horror film Bliss. Now, this is a film that I saw the trailer for. I thought it looked interesting. I thought it might have had a fair share of interesting ideas. I thought it looked like it would be worth a watch for the visuals, which in particular looked really striking. And this is one of those movies that does have elements and parts of the overall story in the film that I do like. And it is one of those movies that, from a visual standpoint, it is stunning. And it is fairly terrific when it comes to other technical aspects of the production. But it really lacks and falls flat and falls short when it comes to being a viable, let alone valuable story or screenplay overall for a myriad and multitude of different reasons. So, Bliss is directed by Joe Begos, who is a up-and-coming independent filmmaker. He's done a few other films. He did this movie. I believe he's also the director of VFW, another film that I'm curious about. And his direction in this is not a problem. His direction is fantastic. He really did a wonderful job directing this movie. From a visual standpoint, it's jaw-dropping, it's breathtaking in more than one occasion. He really does a absolutely stellar job creating stunning visuals that really do recreate the feeling and the experience of being in a drug trip, and really does a equally as impressive job disorientating the audience through flashes of light, through the camera being really alive and pulsating and doing all these different things. Like, the camera really moves and moves in a way that is very off-kilter and weird, that really does suit the overall plot and what's going on in the story, and the overall vibe that Begos is trying to achieve with the film. I don't really think the acting is really a problem with this movie. I think as a director, he does a good job allowing them to operate and to deliver some good performances. When it comes to sequences that have to deal with a little bit more effects, I also think he does a good job directing these sequences that rely more upon a different kind of energy or a different kind of approach to really make them click. So, yeah, the direction is one element of this production that is top notch. I think he also wrote the film, and this is another instance of where it's a production that would have benefited from having another voice, another person in the writer's room. I've noticed this a lot with modern horror films, indie horror films, and so on and so forth, where they nail the visual aspects, the technical aspects of the production, but they severely lack when it comes to the story, when it comes to the characters. And Bliss is sadly not an exception when it comes to that. The story, it seems like it's going to be a anti-drug story about the dangers of drug abuse and how you should not feel the need, or you should not take drugs, period, to fill holes in your life or in your career. But then it turns into a pseudo-vampire movie in the last 10 to 15 minutes, complete with melting bodies after they get shoved in the chest with sharp implements. And that's when the film really starts to lose a lot of its initial luster. It just feels like it's chaotic. It feels like it doesn't really know what kind of film it wants to be. And that's really a prime example of a story that has some interesting elements and interesting concepts with this drug called Bliss, which can create some really trippy side effects, hallucinations, as well as a taste for blood. So, there's some interesting stuff there. There's some potential there. But then it turns into some weird vampire movie by the end, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Especially in the last 10 to 15 minutes, because there are choices that are made when it comes to the narrative that are really quite frustrating as a viewer and confusing and a little bit irritating. Like, for instance, there's this character who is the film paints him as the boyfriend of Desi, and I believe the character, yeah, it's Jeremy Gardner who plays Clive, who was also in I believe it was the same guy who was in the movie After Midnight. So he's her boyfriend, or it seems like they're going to be a love interest. One night, he's trying to take care of her because she's going through one of her drug withdrawal binges or whatever. And she rips his neck open in a really good-looking practical gore effect. Starts drinking blood from his jugular vein. And then, like 5 minutes later, he shows back up again, and he's fine, and he's walking around. And also, he had his ankle bit as well. So the tendons in his ankle were cut up by her teeth. And now he's walking around like he's fine. He's right as rain. He's talking to her. He's just got a little scar in his neck. And he's saying things like, oh, I figured you needed a partner. And I'm like, for this life of yours. And I'm like, okay. So she turned him when she did that. But none of the other sequences, none of the other moments where she attacked anyone in the film showed that that's how people turn. So where is this coming from? Was he always one of these vampires, these drug vampires? That's not clear. So it's just fucking randomness. And then you have these moments where the film tries to fake you out with hallucinations, so you're like, what is real and what's not? So it's like, oh, she killed herself, but then, oh no, she didn't. And then the ending is this pretentious pile of bullshit where, first off, there's this interconnective sort of tissue that's used throughout the plot, which is in the form of this painting that Desi is working on throughout the movie, that she's being commissioned to paint. And it starts out as this kind of benign looking painting of like fire or something, and then during her drug binges she blacks out and the drugs take over, and she starts painting all these like dead bodies, and makes it look like it's in hell. And as she goes along and the bodies keep piling up and they start forming a shape, it really becomes quite predictable. And ultimately what happens is the body is her. The body, the shape of all these bodies in hell is of her. And she's on fire. And then after she finishes the painting, in what is admittedly a really great scene, with a nice use of a metal song, and she's, covered in paint, and just the energy when it comes to this actress's performance as Desi in this scene, Dora Madison, is scintillating. It really is. And it's well edited, but then it ends in a pretentious way where, she finishes the painting, she admires it, realizes it's her, and then she explodes in red paint or blood, and then the movie ends, and you're like, what? So, like, it's one of those films where the story really needed some work. It also needed some work when it comes to the characters, because as good as Dora Madison is as Desi, because she really does a great job with this performance, this character is an unlikable bitch. She's pretentious with a capital P. She walks around like she has a giant stick up her ass. There's nothing about this character that really paints her in a positive way, or in a way where you could see hope for her, or a way to make things actually genuinely tragic when it comes to this allegory, when it comes to this story, when it comes to this whole message that the film is trying to get across. It doesn't really feel that sad. You're not really that sad when she dies because of her addiction to drugs, because she's unlikable through and through. It's a good performance, but she's just a fucking bitch. No one else in the film is really that likable either. Tru Collins is Courtney, her friend, who is also a drug vampire, and one of the first ones. I guess it's supposed to be a vampire movie, but it doesn't really come across that way for the majority of the running time until like the last 10-15 minutes. It just seems more like it's a movie about a bad drug trip and about addiction to drugs. Similar in some ways to Brain Damage, but nowhere near as irreverent or as funny. This also is a film that really takes itself a little bit too seriously at times. There are moments where it's trying to be funny, but it doesn't really play. And then it just seems like it's a film that really would have benefited more from being a black comedy in the vein of Brain Damage than more of a serious horror film. So you have Tru Collins plays Courtney, who's not a stuck-up bitch, but she's a drunk, high bitch. She's a different kind of bitch. You know, she's the kind of party girl who you can't trust and can't rely upon for anything. Rhys Wakefield plays Ronnie. So Jeremy Gardner, like I said, plays Clive. Graham Skipper plays Hadrian. Chris McKenna plays David. Rachel Avery plays Nikki St. John. And there's a few other people. George Wendt is in this as Pops. He actually gets killed by Desi in one of her hunger, drug-fueled rages in one sequence. And the film, like I said, when it comes to the screenplay, of the story, there's some interesting concepts. The drug Bliss, for one, and what it does to you, and the side effects. There are some inspired bits of gore. It is definitely well shot and well edited. And it's got a really nice sense of style when it comes to the visual flair, when it comes to the lighting, when it comes to the cinematography. I didn't mind the music either. So it's one of those films where, yeah, there are things that genuinely are quite impressive or are well done and well worth watching about this movie. That's what makes it so frustrating, that it just turns into this mess by the end of it, because there's really no one to root for. There's really no one that you really care about when it comes to the characters. They're all varying degrees of unlikable or paper thin, or just they really don't paint a full picture when it comes to their characterization. And it's a movie that's like only like 80 minutes, but it starts to drag after a bit because you're just not that engaged in what's going on. It doesn't help either that it starts to become predictable, and then when it's not predictable, it doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it's one of those movies that's ambitious, but I think it's a little bit too ambitious. I think it could have been dialed back a little bit. Might have been a stronger film. In a lot of ways, I think this would have just been a better installment in like an anthology show or an anthology film. Because you can have an unlikable character and a bunch of unlikable characters, and it could still work in that particular vein. Like, for instance, in Tales from the Crypt, there are a lot of episodes with just absolute bastards and bitches and horrible people. But it's only like 20-something minutes, so your stay with these people is not very long. Also, a lot of the time, these characters, they're unlikable, but you still like watching them be horrible people because they have charisma. There's something about them that draws you to them. And I don't really feel that the performance or what Dora Madison had to work with is that kind of unlikable, uh, villainous kind of energy. It's a different kind of energy, which you can deal with a short period of time, but with a feature length, it really does start to wear thin. Um, and then, like, it's just not really that satisfying either of a film because it's got that ending where essentially everybody dies. Not you don't really get to you don't really know really what bliss is either. And on one hand, that could work, but on the other hand, I'm curious. Would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more of what's going on. Um, but it does have its fair share of terrific, just trippy visuals, some really great direction by Begos. Uh, and despite the fact that I don't really like the character that Dora Madison is playing, it's not a bad performance by her. She's easily the best actor or actress out of the bunch, and honestly, I'm curious about seeing what she does next after this because I did I did see a lot of potential with her performance, despite the fact that I really wasn't drawn that much into the character or the characterization of it. Um, there are some critics who've said it reminds them of Lucio Fulci, Gaspar Noé, Abel Ferrara, a little bit, but I mean, I've never really seen a Fulci movie that looks like this in terms of the visuals, in terms of the presentation. Um, it does its job well when it comes to disorientating the audience and in terms of recreating what it might be like to be on Bliss. So it's one of those films where it's not an entirely blissful experience, but it's not entirely bad either. It's one of those below average independent horror films which has some really good visuals, some nice bits of gore, some other elements that click, but as a whole, it just falls apart and just crumbles, and ultimately it melts down. I mean, that's a great way to put it. I mean, there's a lot of people who melt in the climax, and that's really what happens to this movie. It eventually just melts into this just puddle of forgettable, frustrating storytelling and characters. It's a film that I'm glad I saw it at least once for the visuals and for other elements of the movie, but I don't really have a desire to watch it again. I don't have a desire to add it to my collection either. So, that being said, it is a movie that if it looks interesting to you, I'd recommend checking it out. I mean, you very well might like it more than me. And like it is worth at least one watch for the direction and for the visuals, but it's one of those films that just doesn't really live up to its full potential. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of Bliss, and as always, I'll see you guys later. See ya.